It's Lucy Lich, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. Before we get into the show today, have you got a burning question about tiny house living? Here's my personal invitation to you to ask a question you might have been wondering when it comes to living in a tiny house or creating your dream tiny life. I'd love to feature your question on the show in an upcoming episode and share my answer, or perhaps get another expert to answer it if there's someone better suited to speak on things in the same episode as well. To submit your question, head over to tinyhouseconversations.com/voicemail and leave me a 90-second or less voice message there. Thanks so much. Now let's get to the show. Hey, it's Lucy and welcome back to another episode of Tiny House Conversations. This is the first episode of season 2 and I'm so excited to be here with you on the podcast. Now, if you've been listening to the show for a little while, you'll know that I moved into my tiny house. It's been about a year now and life has been really great, settling into tiny living and transitioning to really just living and being in a different way than I've ever before. Now, I haven't shared much about my journey along the way in this first year, including on social media, and what also felt really important for me is just to live and be present in my daily life without documenting things, without needing to post and share and, you know, all of that stuff, sort of just really soaking it all in and, you know, just experiencing also maybe the different emotions and just other things that came up in that time of transitioning to this way of living and being. And if I remember back to when I first moved in, so it was the first week of December 2022. Yeah, 2022. Or was it 2023? I don't know what year it is at the moment. We're in 2024. Yeah, it would have been the end of 2022. And it was interesting because my tiny actually sat there for maybe 5 or 6 weeks before I could properly move in. I remember that around end of October or something like that, there were actually some floods down here on the south coast of New South Wales, and I had to also postpone the delivery date of my tiny initially. And then once I got to site, because of all the floods, one of the things that I needed to get done by a local plumber was to get the rainwater tank connected, as well as create an absorption trench for grey water, and also finish off the vent pipe installation for the composting toilet. And so those were the main things, because I had the solar set up before that, and just other things like that were all good to go. I moved all my stuff in, or I moved most of my stuff in, but I still wasn't able to live in it properly because there was no connection to water and no way to use the toilet. I mean, I could have used the toilet, but yeah, the ventilation was important for that. And anyway, once I finally moved in, it didn't take long for me to just feel really settled and living at home on the land and, you know, in this real peaceful paradise on a landowner's property, which is about 5 acres, and it's just so beautiful out here. And I feel for me it wasn't such a massive transition, even though it's very different to how I used to live in the suburbs in Sydney, near the beach and all of that. It is very different to how I used to live, but I think because I've been on this journey for a long time of self-growth and healing and reconnecting deeper and deeper to nature and to myself and to community and just, you know, wanting to work towards more sustainability and less impact on the earth and just all those things that come along with tiny life and that really align with tiny life, it wasn't such a huge transition for me. Now, I will share some interesting things that I experienced and, you know, some adjustments and things like that you know, have gone on in the last year, which, you know, if I think about things, I've heard many horror stories and just things going wrong with people living in their tiny homes and, depending on what climate and area of the country or the world you're in, I've heard of people, having to get up and in the middle of the night in the dark, in the snow, having to turn the generator on and, some things are frozen or whatever it might be. So I'm really grateful that none of that has happened, but I will share a couple of interesting mishaps and lessons, I suppose you could say, that I've experienced in this last year. So now that I've well and truly settled in, it's been at this point, time of recording, about a year and a month. So let's just say around 13 months. I want to share with you a few different things. So let's see where we end up. First, I want to talk about one of my intentions for living in a tiny house, and I guess it's an overarching intention that we can explore, and it's this idea of self-responsibility. Before I moved into my tiny house, and I suppose before I even started designing my tiny house, some questions I was asking myself before I moved in were, how am I living and how much space am I taking up? What am I consuming? What lifestyle choices and daily habits are detrimental to the earth? Where am I contradicting myself and how can I do and be better? And really, where can I take more self-responsibility? Because I feel like it's, for me at least, it's an evolving and ever-evolving journey. So it's not like, okay, all my ducks are in a row and, everything is perfect and I'm fully taking self-responsibility in every aspect of my life. No, that's a continual path that I'm walking, and I'm always looking to see where I can improve and do better. And so a big part of this self-responsibility was to, take that outsourcing away a little bit, when we're thinking about resources. So water, power, when living in a regular home, outsourcing, the sewerage system, outsourcing electricity to the power companies and just those types of things, right? And so the way that I'm set up is I'm fully off-grid with a solar trailer, so energy independence, with a composting toilet, managing my own waste. I hate to use that word. Anthony from Water Wally talks about it's not waste if you don't waste it. So let's say organic matter. And learning actually to manage it and create compost to then participate in that cycle of nature and giving back to the earth, and that reciprocity that we see that with things like regenerative farming too. The animals that live on the land, let's say the grass-fed cows that are living on the property next to me, they're eating the grass and they're excreting back into the earth, and this is helping to sequester carbon and regenerate. It's being really connected to the cycles of nature and, being closer to the elements, the seasons. My tiny home, it's really interesting. It's actually gone through in this last year the wind test, the rain test or the flooding test, the sun test, all the different seasons, and so far so good. The tiny is still here, and I'm lucky to be on a hill, so when it comes to the times where it's had heavy rain, and there've been a few times, I'll speak about that in a little while, that actually a couple months ago I got stranded because it flooded here, but yeah, I'll get to that in a moment. And there's been some extreme winds here, and where I'm situated on the property is probably in the position where it gets the most wind. And, we were preparing for bushfires this summer, but then it's actually turned out to be a rainy summer so far. And so also just considering, oh no, are we going to run out of water? Because there was a time where it was really dry, and for I'd say months, there was no rain at all, and you really got to see that on the land. And, our rainwater tanks were starting to dry up. I mean, I'm really lucky that just being one person, I've got an over 20,000 litre tank, which was already on the property. And so for me, that lasted a really long time. And then when the floods came a couple of months ago, everything filled back up, and, I think I'm going to be definitely okay for a while now. And with my solar trailer, I, have been really grateful that even during the winter last year, so my first winter in my tiny home, it was actually a really sunny winter. And so most days the sun was out and I still haven't had to use my generator once. And, I'm also blessed that the solar trailer is situated in a spot where probably about 10, 15 meters away from my tiny, where it gets sun all day long from different angles. My tiny gets sun all day long from different angles too. And so it's just been really great and haven't had to worry about that. But it's been also interesting to just be really mindful of my power use anyway, right? Just really saying, okay, well, if I'm using the oven at the moment, even though it's sunny all the time, I'm just mindful of how much power I'm using, so I won't use the stove at the same time, even though it probably would be okay on those days where the sun is just out for all of the day. And I don't have an air conditioner here or a washing machine, so I haven't had to worry about that. But that's been really interesting to just monitor and notice. And I love being energy independent, because when there were floods a couple of months ago, I didn't even know that the power went out here on the land, and the landowner who's on the grid, she lost power and I didn't. So I wasn't even aware until she told me a day or so later, and really, really grateful for that independence, that off-grid life, and to not have to rely on external sources for these really, really precious resources. And, I've really come to, even though I said before, I've got more than 20,000 litre rainwater tank, I'm still really mindful of how much water I'm using, even to the point of like when I'm watering my garden and, shower and all of that, I'm still as mindful as I can. Like, even though I've got lots of water and I'm not going to run out, I still don't want to waste it. And I'm so glad to have the composting toilet that I'm saving so much, hundreds, thousands of litres of water, I don't even know. So that's been a real gift, I feel, to experience that and to live like that. And, when I go to friends' places or my mum's place or whatever, and there's a flushing toilet, it just doesn't feel the same. It just feels strange now. So that's really nice to notice. And just some experiences that I wanted to highlight and share with you. So, not only was I talking before about living with less impact, and another thing that I've really noticed about living in my tiny home for the first year, which I'm very much used to now, is because I'm living in a smaller space, there are things that are either less convenient than they would be in a regular home, or I would need to maybe take things out and then put them back again, and take them out and put them back, and, again and again and again. So it's not as convenient as just having something there all the time. But actually there's something really satisfying about that. It's kind of like, well, everything has its place in my tiny home, and then it's also a way to just keep things neat and tidy and not just have stuff out, everywhere and feeling cluttered and all of that. And it just feels so satisfying. I think that's the word that comes to me around all of that. It's just satisfying. And it really doesn't take that much time. And I feel like living in the modern world that we do today it's become so much about convenience, and I want this now, and I want to try and find the most efficient and effective way to do this. And I basically don't even want to do anything. I don't want to use my body anymore. I don't want to use my brain anymore, right? Can you see all the ways that is actually true and present and current in our modern day? Like, our phones have meant that we're not using our brain, all our devices really are not using our brain like we used to. And, the convenience culture of having everything at our fingertips, or getting things delivered to our door and all sorts of things, we don't need to move as much. And, I wonder what the long-term effects are going to be of that. And so this is why it's so fine for me to just live in a way that maybe seems a little bit more inconvenient, when really it's not that much. But it has so many rewards, and it's such a beautiful trade-off. And I guess just something to say as well about using resources. So when it's water and power, what I've really noticed for me is that just simply knowing that I may not have infinite access to these things like I would when living in a regular home, like most of my life, where the water's always flowing, there's always power, that I've actually come to so deeply appreciate these resources way more than before. I felt like I had a good appreciation before because many years ago, and I spent a fair bit of time traveling in Africa multiple times and living over there a bit as well. I had family over there and also in South Africa and also spent time in different parts of Southern Africa just doing different project work. That was feels like a lifetime ago or another life. But those types of experiences really helped me to just be really grateful for my life in a world of privilege, which I'm very well aware of. And I still know that I live very privileged in many ways in my tiny house and the lifestyle I've created here and how it's all came to be. I very much know that. But I think it's added another layer to living this way where, the resources can potentially run out, if something happens. Thankfully that hasn't happened, but I think that deeper appreciation of just everything and everyone in my life has been so enriching and so humbling to experience. Some practical things that I've learnt to do living out on the land, that I've never ever done before in my life. So I wanted to share a little bit about that with you. So using a whippersnipper, using a push mower, using a wood splitter, a mulcher, and as I mentioned before, creating compost, especially from my own organic matter, growing vegetables. So I never grew anything before living in my tiny home because I always had access to farmers markets and health food stores. And I never, for the most part, there probably were a few places where I did have a garden, but just for whatever reason back then, I always went to the farmers markets or health food stores to get my food. And so no, it's a learning process of me doing that here, and I'm really grateful that there were already 5 garden beds right next to where my tiny house is parked, that the landowner has said, you can use those for your own purpose, whatever you want. And so I've got, like a few veggies growing as well as a little cactus, a sacred cactus garden, which I absolutely love. I've learnt to plant some trees, and what I've got to experience from living out here on the land is that even though there's so many amazing benefits, and I don't feel like I would want to go back to living in the city or in the suburbs, it is actually a lot of work too. So, like I help out on the land for 3 or 4 hours a week. Sometimes I do little extra things here and there. And then I also look after like my little corner of the property where my tiny's parked. And I see what the landowner here does, and it is a lot of work. It's a lot of work that in a different way than when you might be living in a regular home. There's always jobs to do. There's always something to do on the land. I'm thinking about currently where there's been a lot of rain recently, and so everything is just growing so quickly, which is obviously really great. But you mow the lawn, whippersnip the grass or whatever one week, and then you come back 5 days later, a week later, and it's like you need to do it again because it's growing so quickly, and it's just this never-ending thing. And then of course there's the landowner here there's a veggie garden, and there's bees and there's chickens, and so attending to all of that, I see how much work all of that collectively on top of the rest of what goes on the land. It's a lot of work for people that have bigger properties, and I know people that have even bigger properties. It's such a big responsibility to be a caretaker of the land, but it is also really, really beautiful. And I suppose I think about it in a different way, like it's hard work in a different way in terms of if you were having to go to a regular job or work on the computer and work online, and it's a different kind of hard work, but it actually feels satisfying and not draining because you're out on the land in nature. It's been a little over a year now that I've been living here, and I have constantly felt in this year that there's so many things I'd like to do on the land, and I know I've got plenty of time to be able to do that. And I guess I really needed the first year to just really well and truly settle in and be like, okay, like this is something that I definitely know I want to continue to do, and I want to live out here on the land, and I'd love to be, more involved with caretaking the land. And at the same time, it's been interesting sort of navigating my work life, working online for Park My Tiny House, as well as yoga teaching and doing some other in-person events. I do some yoga chanting and other things too. And so kind of just navigating all of that whilst also living out here, and then, doing some different jobs on the land and stuff. It's been interesting to navigate. And there are times where it's like, oh my goodness, like I don't have enough time for everything. I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm really grateful that I'm actually mostly able to work at home so that I can enjoy my tiny life. I know that not everyone has that privilege either, that maybe you have to go to a specific workplace or, every day or full-time or whatever it might be. But it's been really great to be able to experience that. And I want to share, so I mentioned before, there's a few mishaps over this past year that have happened, and really it hasn't been anything too crazy. And one of the first ones ended up being that when I was getting my deck built, because I think I got my deck built maybe about a month and a half after I moved in, something like that, there was a discussion with the builder around how high to have the roof of the deck. And there were two things that I said to him, that I wanted to be able to have a view out of my loft bedroom. And obviously I wanted to be able to protect from the elements as much as possible. For whatever reason, we ended up making the height of the deck too high. So we actually, because he was like, okay, well, if you don't want to obstruct the view from your room, then we need to make the deck higher than the tiny. And I think I've mentioned this in a previous episode before, but it's worth mentioning again, that probably a day or two after the deck was finished, it rained pretty heavily and the whole deck got wet. And I was like, oh no, why did we do that? And so I actually had to get him to come back and lower the height of the deck. And I don't even know why we didn't do that initially, because after it was all done, and then I was like, what's a priority for me is to be able to be on the deck, all year round as much as possible. I mean, I understand that if it's like flooding, that maybe the whole deck will still get wet, but I want to still be able to like be outside as much as possible, even if it is raining. And so we resolved that problem, but that was about a $1,500 lesson learned. And I also realized after that too, after it was all done, I was like, I actually don't look out my loft window that much. I guess I thought that I might, but when it came down to it, I was like, I do look out the window, but I don't, like, I've got a beautiful view from every other part of the tiny house, which is where I probably spend more time, where, in my sleeping loft is mainly just for sleeping. I don't really lay around there and look at the views for that long anyway. So there's that. Another interesting thing that happened, and this was more recently in the last couple of months, towards the end of 2023, where we had some heavy floods, and my composting toilet fan, one day I just noticed that it switched off, like the green light where the fan's normally running went off, and I was like, that's really weird, why did that happen? And then it's obviously with the fan being off, start to have like a little bit of a smell. And I came to realize that when the plumbers came to install the vent pipe a year earlier, that they hadn't actually put a weatherproof vent cowl at the top of the vent pipe. And so what had happened in that year, and I think the floods were, the straw that broke the camel's back and sent it over the edge, was that all this rain, bugs, dust and dirt were getting into the vent pipe. And, when the floods happened, it got into all the water got into the electrics and basically disabled the fan, and it wasn't working anymore. And the thing is, I remember looking up at the vent pipe and thinking, I wonder how that protects from, what happens if it rains? Because it was an open pipe. But silly me, kind of just assumed, I was like, well, there must be something at the very top of the pipe that I can't see from where I'm looking, when I stand, underneath the pipe, or just when I'm standing from a distance away looking up. And I just trusted that. And so now, I guess one of the things that came from that is I actually got to learn about different plumbing parts and what a vent cowl is and what some other parts are to rectify the situation. So I actually called the same plumbers that installed, and they were so apologetic. They actually said it is standard practice that we should do that, but I guess it was just one of those things that we forgot to do. We actually forgot to come back and put the vent cowl on. It was right before Christmas, or a few weeks before Christmas, when it got installed. I know there was a lot going on, but anyway, there's no excuse, but that was a big lesson learned for me. Thankfully the composting toilet manufacturer was super helpful and sent over a new exhaust fan for free, and helped me just navigate that whole thing, and made sure that I had all the correct parts and how that could be installed and all of that. So, but that was annoying, because I think I was without that fan for about a week, and what started to happen was some bugs and things were getting in, and not great, but not the end of the world. And so, speaking of composting toilets, so the one that I use, and I mentioned this in previous episodes before, is a self-contained wandering Wally from Water Wally, Anthony at Water Wally, who's been on the podcast, I think episode 15. And I'll put a link in the show notes for that, about composting toilets and grey water systems. That has been a very interesting experiment and experience in itself too. Now, it's probably worked out for the best that I went with a self-contained composting toilet for my first year in my tiny home. There's many reasons for that, and I guess I'll give you a little teaser here, and then I will go further into these things in future episodes. But I'm actually going to be moving from where I am now. This was always going to be a sort of temporary couple of years, to 2 to 3 years, living in this parking space, and an opportunity has come up for me to move elsewhere with a dear friend on their land. And in that case, I'm also going to be looking at selling this current tiny and upgrading to a new tiny home. There's many reasons for that too. I absolutely love this first tiny, but I feel like in terms of space and what I want to create and where I'm headed in my own personal life, that I've outgrown the space in this place. And so having a self-contained composting toilet where I didn't have to get a hole cut in the floor to have a chamber below the floor is going to be a lot less complicated when I sell this tiny house on, I feel, and that might even make it give the opportunity for whoever ends up buying the tiny to potentially put, whatever kind of toilet they want in here, because there is also a capped plumbing connection if someone wanted to plug it into mains or septic, or maybe, and it's very easily, like the Wandering Wall is very easy to just unscrew and lift out, and without having to sort of seal up any hole in the floor or anything like that. And it's actually just been really good for me to go through the process and have this routine of, changing the toilet once a week, and, learning to create compost in external wheelie bins, and, I've learned a lot through that. I will say there have been some funny experiences though, because I think if you'll know what I'm talking about if you're someone that has used or you do have your own self-contained composting toilet, whether it's, it doesn't matter what brand it is. There's some interesting things that can happen when you're sort of in closer contact with your own organic matter, especially when it comes to the design of these different types of self-contained toilets, especially if they have a urine diverter. I'm going to kind of just leave it at that, and you can use your imagination because there might be a little bit too much TMI if I go a bit further. But there's definitely been some interesting experiences around that. But it's actually, I'm super used to it and I don't get grossed out by that kind of stuff. And it's been a really good learning experience. But yeah, my next tiny is going to have a split system. And as I said before, I'll give you more information on that in future episodes. I'm also going to talk more about the composting toilet option that I'm going to choose, which stay tuned. One other thing I'll mention, and these are not such bad mishaps, but living on a country road has turned out to be, it can be a little bit sort of harder on the car, and my car's dirty 24/7 pretty much, and I kind of just had to be okay with that, which that doesn't bother me at all. I'm just like, okay, well my car's just always going to be dirty from the road, and I've had 3 flat tires in the last year, and that's more than I've had in many, many years of driving a car. So that's been interesting. It's a small price to pay for living in a beautiful part of the land, living in a way that I really intentionally and consciously wanted to create and experience. Now, I'm feeling that's all I have to share for this episode about my first year living tiny. If you have any questions or feedback or comments, you're always welcome to come and say hi, get in touch on Instagram or Facebook at Tiny House Conversations. And if you want to revisit any episodes or show notes from previous conversations in season 1, you can head over to tinyhouseconversations.com. Wherever you are on your tiny house journey, this podcast is for you. Thanks again for listening. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, you found it valuable, and you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So here are 3 ways that you can support the podcast. Number 1, if you have a friend or family member that you feel would benefit from hearing these conversations, feel free to share it with them, email them, text them, send them a telegram, do whatever you need to do to share it with them. Number 2, if you hit the subscribe button, you'll know exactly when the next episode is live. And number 3, if you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you so much in advance. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next episode.